It's an age-old question. Does a filmmaker make a movie for themselves or for the audiences? Some directors tend to create with general audiences in mind, crafting big blockbuster films without a recognizable personal style that connects them. Others have a style that they have honed to perfection, to the point that you can immediately tell that they are the director of a film. This situation is perhaps no more true of any filmmaker in history than Quentin Tarantino.
I made this movie for myself, and everybody else is invited.
Over the course of his career, this course of action has worked out pretty well for him. Tarantino makes Tarantino films. However, there is one film that wasn't met with positive critical reception that he had been accustomed to. Ironically, that same film might just be most distinctly Tarantino film he's ever made, packed wall to wall with his signature touches and fully embracing his trademark style. That film is Death Proof. It flopped, and even Tarantino himself has called it his worst work. But why? How could something he poured his heart, soul, and love of film into not land?
Who's down for dough shot truce?
Let's explore how this quote-unquote failure came to be, despite being made by one of the most marketable filmmakers of our time. Death Proof was initially created as a half of a double feature Grindhouse.
Only at the Grindhouse.
A throwback to the style of low-budget exploitation and horror films that were popular in the 60s and 70s.
The dead hand that crawls and kills.
Paired with Robert Rodriguez's Splatterfest Planet Terror.
2 adrenaline-fueled roller coasters. 1 ticket to ride.
Tarantino was extremely enthusiastic about the big swing he and his film buddy were taking. By this time in his career, Tarantino had been comfortable setting out to make the movies he wanted to make, applying his style to different genres, and having the result be immediately embraced as a masterpiece. Tarantino's crushing reality was that, despite a massive, well-attended premiere and his best intentions, the Grindhouse experiment was ultimately a failure.
In my book, that's no good.
To this day, it's his worst-rated film. By his own admission, Tarantino walked into Death Proof's production cocky.
We had gotten used to going off into uncharted territory, with you with Sin City and me with Kill Bill, and hacking our way through and people following us, and we kind of thought they would follow us anywhere.
It's an interesting situation because while Death Proof contains so many Tarantino-isms, its parallels can be made with so many of his other films. The one it has most in common with is actually one of his best, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. These films both feel extremely personal to Tarantino, his love letter to an age of cinema long past.
A spaghetti secret agent James Bond ripoff type flick called Operazione Dynamite.
Many people would also argue that they are an acquired taste rather than an outright hit. These aren't the films you use to introduce someone to Quentin Tarantino. They're the ones you watch last.
I thought so.
These films aren't for everyone for a number of reasons. In both cases, the narratives consist of many loose plot points, many of which go ignored or largely unresolved. Only a few actually move the story forward. Large portions of their runtimes are used to follow characters having extended conversations with distinctly Tarantino dialogue.
I've let him give me a foot massage.
Or otherwise just going about their day. Both are at their core examinations of old Hollywood through the lens of someone who idolizes the era. Both even have main characters that are relics, old men who are out of time and out of touch with the modern day.
Do you know any of these shows or people I'm talking about?
Sorry, no?
No.
With such similar narrative course and the same dedicated filmmaker behind the camera, it begs the question, why did Death Proof flop while Once Upon a Time in Hollywood soared?
What a picture.
What a picture. Good picture.
The obvious reason is that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood cast was stacked with major stars, and it took place in a romanticized version of a period that audiences tend to appreciate. However, the truth is that Death Proof suffered from a very specific defect. It represents the perfect example of a director getting carried away with indulging in their personal niche taste, going overboard with preferred techniques, and relying on the audiences to go along for the ride based on their name alone.
Indulgent, he really is. He's one of the most indulgent filmmakers.
For instance, the narrative structure of Death Proof is extremely unconventional.
Oh, I'm sorry, you were telling a story?
This is something that Tarantino has made excellent use of in the past, but he took this concept to another level here. The film is essentially split in 2 halves. The first half follows Jungle Julia and her friends as they talk, hang out at the bar, and go about their lives until violence strikes. Second half, well, it does the exact same thing, just with a group of different women in a different location. We meet Kim, Lee, Abernathy, and actual stunt woman Zoe Bell. Then stuntman Mike strikes again. Sure, the characters and circumstances are different, but the way the halves are structured causes them to feel largely the same until the climax. This style of setup heavily echoes scenes in few other Tarantino films, but perhaps most of all, the opening of Reservoir Dogs. Visually, the two scenes are almost identical. The cast sits around the table in some kind of a restaurant and simply talks, while the camera slowly pans around them, giving each character a chance to chime in. It's a very effective technique that gets us invested in the characters and their dynamics, while also generating visual interest. But in both cases, the actual conversations are not at all related to the plot. They are there just to set up the shocking scenes that follow. However, Reservoir Dogs' opening conversation lasts less than 10 minutes before proceeding with the movie, which is what some might already consider too long. On the other hand, Death Proof's opening conversation, both of them that is, make up a large portion of their roughly 45 minutes runtime. In essence, the conversations are the movie.
Okay, can we just take my sex life off the table?
Actually, it was Cecil's sex life that was on the table, and your lack of one.
The slasher aspect of the film,
Stuntman Mike,
is presented as a weird old man who stalks and steals sideways glances at attractive women, and then a switch is flipped and he's suddenly a murderous, borderline insane serial killer.
You really need to be sitting in my seat.
The old man weirdness of stuntman Mike can be interpreted as hints of his true intentions, but there is never an increase in intensity until the bloody end. It just goes from a 0 to 100 on a dime, without the steady increase of tension that is a hallmark of a slasher genre.
Now I gotta catch me my other girlfriends.
It's clear that Tarantino got carried away in the conversations, resulting in a lack of tension and experience that tracks for the viewers who are not invested in his writing abilities.
She used to beat you up and take your chocolate milk, huh?
Might have kicked my ass a couple of times. Sorry, I'm built like a girl, not a black man. But I died before I ever gave Julian Kai my chocolate milk.
There's just not much there to keep them engaged, when so much of the runtime is uneventful talk with occasional hints of something more sinister.
Is it my scar?
It's your car.
On the subject of Tarantino's dialogue, this is another area where Death Proof falters. Because such large portions of the movie are just dialogue without plot significance, the resulting feeling is that Tarantino relies on his conversations being cool or entertaining on their own,
Shot first, questions later. Here we go, post time!
rather than using them to expand the story or the world as a whole. There are multiple instances of characters unnecessarily repeating the same lines.
Kind of cute, or kind of hot, or kind of sexy, or better be fucking hysterically funny, but not funny looking guy. Kind of cute, kind of hot, kind of sexy, hysterically funny, but not funny looking guy.
Stuntman Mike.
Stuntman Mike's your name.
Stuntman Mike.
And who the hell is Stuntman Mike?
He's Stuntman.
You thinking what I'm thinking?
I think I'm thinking.
What are you when you thinking?
And even more points that could be made very briefly.
Why would someone who doesn't drink spend hours at a bar drinking water?
You know, bar offers all kind of things other than alcohol.
That instead get drawn out with flowery conversations.
Like what?
Women. Nacho Grande platters. The fellowship of some fascinating individuals like Warren here.
This again is Tarantino relying too heavily on his brand. However, the biggest issue with Death Proof's dialogue might be what critics like Mark Kermode have pointed out.
Everyone in this film talks like Quentin Tarantino. He says, oh, it's about a group of women who talk like Quentin Tarantino. All his characters are the same person, they're all him, don't matter whether they're male, female, it doesn't make any difference.
Vanishing Point, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry.
Vanishing Point days, the Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry days.
They feel more like mouthpieces for his likes,
What's Vanishing Point? It's just one of the best American movies ever made.
opinions,
CGI?
Unfortunately, Pam, nowadays, more often than not, you're right.
and cinematic preferences.
So you didn't watch John Hughes movies?
Because of this, none of the characters come across as well-rounded. They exist as mere cliches of women. But in a way, this makes sense. Everyone in Death Proof is painted as the type of a cliche character that gets savagely killed in the B-tier horror film, which is exactly what Tarantino set out to make. He embraced the cliches of the genre, applied his style, and did his best to capitalize on his brand. Evidently though, to a fault. Something else that didn't help Death Proof's critical reception was some of the strange, seemingly random decisions made regarding the film's presentation. That old gritty 70s styles format that played such a big role in the marketing, it gets ditched after the first half of the film. Why? It's not clear.
What?
And neither is the inexplicable black and white segments that only last for a few minutes at the beginning of the second half. The Kill Bill movies used black and white scenes to great effect, but that was because there was a purpose to them, designating flashbacks of the bride's trauma. In Death Proof though, black and white usage feels random, like he had to have it there, just to check off the box on the list of Tarantinoisms he wanted to cover. Some have speculated that these stylistic choices were made because the first half is an homage to exploitation B-movies, while the second half is an homage to car chase films. But it ultimately only adds to the unconventionality that makes Death Proof just feel off.
Wait a minute, what am I doing here?
It gives the impression that rather than a singular vision executed in a signature style, Death Proof tries to be everything Grindhouse at once. A slasher film, cheerleader film, a horror film, thriller film, car film, female exploitation film, and Tarantino film on top of all that. For Tarantino, Rodriguez, and their die-hard cinematically literate fans, the overextended experiment was fine. It was just another fun adventure into uncharted territory.
That was fun!
However, for wider audiences,
no, it's not.
Tarantino played with too many tropes, relied on existing knowledge of too many genres, and created something that flew too far over the head of an average moviegoer. At the end of the day, this scene from Planet Terror is the perfect visual representation of Tarantino's approach to Death Proof.
Need some wood? I'm gonna give you some wood.
He and Rodriguez made Grindhouse because they thought it would be fun to make a couple of movies without taking them too seriously, and they thought audiences would understand and even enjoy that unseriousness. As a result, they ran into a common problem when trying to tackle horror/thriller genres in a fun, goofy way. Their films ultimately suffered from, as the critics said, being too funny to be scary and too scary to be funny.
I also want your balls.
I'm quite attached to it.
What was particularly interesting though was the trajectory of the two filmmakers after Grindhouse. Planet Terror was actually received worse than Death Proof, and yet he decided to double and even triple down on the same style of low-budget exploitation films, with Machete and Machete Kills.
The enemy may have a missile, but we have Machete.
Tarantino, on the other hand, was discouraged from making movies entirely. He even played around with the idea of creating a mini-series instead. Thankfully though, a lunch meeting with fellow director Luc Besson gave him the wake-up call he needed.
You make me want to leave the house and go see cinema. And now you tell me I'm going to have to wait 4 years? 5 years before I can do that again? I'm sorry, I'm not so excited.
He convinced him to trim down that miniseries, get back in the director's chair, and do what he does best, make interesting, compelling cinema. That cut-down miniseries turned out to be Inglourious Basterds, arguably Tarantino's biggest epic so far, and the film that reminded everyone who did not like Death Proof just how great of a director Tarantino really is. If you made it this far, big thank you for watching all the way until the end. And if you want to watch more videos like this, make sure to subscribe, as more will be coming soon. Peace!